A shape cut across the black past Nathan Doyle's dive light 200 feet down in Lake Tahoe, moving with a purpose the current in that basin has never once had, and it wasn't the missing diver he'd spent 3 years searching for. A second ago, his own light was the only thing moving down there. Now something else was too. He held his position at 200 feet, buoyancy locked, and watched the shape drift along the base of a submerged boulder field he'd mapped a dozen times without ever once seeing it shift. His dive computer logged a temperature drop of 4 degrees in under a minute, the kind of swing that shouldn't happen this deep in a lake this cold and this still. Whatever had displaced that boulder-sized shadow didn't retreat when his light swept back across it. It came half a body length closer instead. Nathan didn't surface. He'd learned 3 years earlier exactly what a recovery mission loses the second someone panics, and bolts for the top before the job is finished. That patience is the reason his camera caught something nobody outside a locked county server has ever seen, and it's the reason Nathan is finally willing to explain why he believes this lake has never actually released anyone it decided to keep. 3 years ago, it wasn't Nathan who went under at that same boulder field. It was his younger brother, Caleb, on what was supposed to be a routine buddy dive with a longtime dive partner named Grant Selby. Only one of them came back up. Grant's account never changed across 3 years of retelling it. A sudden silt out, zero visibility, and by the time it cleared, Caleb's line had gone slack and his light was simply gone. The recovery team never found a body, only a single fin, wedged nearly 40 feet from where Grant said the silt out happened. 40 feet is a long way for anything to drift in a lake this still. Grant Selby stopped diving that particular stretch after that week. He didn't stop diving Tahoe altogether, he just moved his operation to the North Shore, and in 3 years he has never once come back out to help Nathan search. Nathan doesn't know if that's guilt or something else. He stopped asking him directly, because the one time he did, Grant hung up before he finished the question. The second time he tried, almost a year later, Grant picked up but didn't speak for 11 full seconds before finally saying he had a charter waiting and hanging up again. Nathan timed it on his phone without meaning to, the way you time things that matter more than you're ready to admit. He kept Grant's number saved under Caleb's dive buddy instead of his own name. He's never explained to himself why he couldn't bring himself to change it. Nathan's mother asked him once, gently, to let the case close the way the county wanted it closed. He told her he would. He was already 3 months into planning his first technical certification course when he said it. What do you tell a family whose only proof their son existed is a single fin recovered 40 feet from where he supposedly vanished? The county's own search summary closed Caleb's case within 4 months, citing a phrase divers around Tahoe have repeated to each other for generations, long before Nathan ever needed it to apply to someone he loved. This lake never gives up its dead. It's not just a saying, it's real physics, and Nathan knew that going in. Lake Tahoe sits nearly 1,700 feet deep at its lowest point, the second deepest lake in the country. And once a body sinks past a certain depth, the water down there stays cold enough, year-round, that the bacteria responsible for the gas buildup that normally floats a body back to the surface simply can't do their work. Cold water doesn't let go the way warmer lakes do. That part of the explanation is honest, and Nathan has never disputed it. What the county's summary didn't explain was the fin. A fin doesn't need bacteria or gas to float. It needs current, or it needs something to carry it. Nothing in that basin carries anything 40 feet on its own. Nathan spent the next 2 years getting certified for exactly the kind of technical recovery work that stretch of lake demands, teaching himself patience one boulder field survey at a time, mapping every ledge and crevice along that slope until he knew it better than the county's own dive unit did. He wasn't chasing a monster. He was chasing the 40 feet nobody could explain. Then, on a routine mapping pass 11 weeks ago, his sonar returned a mass in a crevice he'd surveyed a dozen times before and never once flagged as anything but rock. This time it flagged. He didn't go down that day. He went home instead and sat with his brother's old dive log for 6 hours, the one detail from it he'd never told the county circling back louder than it ever had before. Caleb's entry for that morning listed the water as flat calm, no current logged at all. A silt out needs disturbance. Flat calm water doesn't disturb itself. That's the entry Nathan brought back down with him the day his light finally caught the shape at the base of the boulder field, and it's the reason he didn't panic when it came closer instead of retreating. He let it come. For nearly a full minute, neither of them moved, the shape holding position less than 15 feet from his light, low and broad against the rock, motionless except for a slow pulse along one edge that Nathan's mind kept trying and failing to read as current. Then it turned, unhurried, and settled back into the crevice his sonar had flagged, the same one it had apparently used long before his survey ever found it. Nathan followed the beam of his light into that crevice, close enough to see inside without entering it, and found the actual reason the county revoked his permit less than an hour after he filed his report. The crevice wasn't empty rock. It was a cache. Something caught his light first, dozens of small shapes half buried in silt, their edges throwing back a faint, uneven glint that didn't belong on bare rock. Objects that had no business drifting together into one enclosed space in a lake with no current to gather them there. Further back, half swallowed by silt, something larger sat wedged against the wall, its outline too regular to be natural, the kind of loss that goes unexplained off Tahoe's surface once or twice a decade and never makes it into any harbor report. Someone or something had been collecting and had been doing it for far longer than 3 years. Near the front of the cache, wedged into the same silt, Nathan's light caught a strap he recognized instantly, a color choice that had always been Caleb's alone, ever since Nathan bought him the replacement gear the year before he disappeared. He didn't touch it. Not yet. And some part of him already knew the report he filed topside would decide who reached that crevice next. If a decision like that would keep you up too, go ahead and subscribe, because what Nathan did next is not something his recovery permit ever authorized. Nathan surfaced, reported the crevice's exact coordinates and a description of everything in it, and requested formal county backing for a documented recovery dive. Within the hour, his permit was suspended pending review, and the review board cited disturbance risk to an undesignated habitat area, a classification that had never once applied to that stretch of lake in 3 years of his diving it. Nobody on the review board had ever dived that crevice themselves. A lakeside developer named Priya Anand had been petitioning the county for 18 months to close public search access to that exact cove, hoping to clear the way for a private marina expansion that stalled every time a missing person search reopened old questions about what actually happens to bodies in that basin. Anand's name appears on the review board's habitat classification memo as a submitted public comment, filed 9 days before Nathan's report. 9 days is a strange amount of time to have already known what he'd find. At the review board's next public hearing, Anand spoke for exactly 90 seconds, thanking the county for its diligence in protecting sensitive habitat before anyone had disclosed what that habitat actually contained. Nathan sat 2 rows behind her and said nothing, because he still didn't fully understand yet how a marina proposal had ended up on the same agenda as his brother's case. He understands it now. He just can't prove the 2 items were ever supposed to share a hearing at all. A clerk who processed the hearing's paperwork later told Nathan, off the record, that Anand's comment had originally been filed under a different agenda item entirely. Before someone moved it, the clerk wouldn't say who. Nathan didn't push because he'd already learned exactly how fast a source like that stops answering the phone. Nathan called Grant Selby that same week for the first time in nearly 2 years. He told him about the cache and about the fin found 40 feet from a silt out that flat, calm water couldn't have caused. He didn't hang up this time. What Grant told him instead rewrote 3 years of blame in under a minute. Grant said Caleb hadn't panicked and swum off alone the way the county's file always implied. Something had pulled him, hard enough to snap the safety clip on his line, and Grant had gone after him until his own air forced him back toward the surface. He never told the county that part. He was afraid nobody would believe the version where something else was actually down there, and afraid, if they did believe it, that they'd blame him for coming back up at all. Grant's voice broke once during that call, right after he admitted he'd spent 3 years assuming Nathan hated him for surfacing without his brother. He hadn't. He'd just never known there was a different reason to. Guilt, it turns out, wears the same silence as guilt over something completely different. Once you strip away the version the county filed, Caleb's disappearance stops looking like a solo diver's mistake and starts looking like something with a pattern. Marine biologists who study high-altitude lake systems aren't willing to name what's using that crevice, and they're right not to guess. What they'll concede is that Tahoe's basin formed roughly 2 million years ago through tectonic faulting later carved deeper by glaciers, making it one of the oldest, most isolated bodies of fresh water in North America, cut off from any ocean access for longer than most species alive today have existed at all. An old, isolated basin like that doesn't need a new species. It only needs one that was never confirmed to have left. The largest predator ever formally confirmed in Tahoe is the lake trout, introduced generations ago and capable of growing large by lake standards, but nowhere near large enough to explain a crevice of gathered belongings or a fin carried 40 feet against still water. Nobody. Sirius is arguing the trout did this. Nathan has since found 4 other cases in the county archive going back 3 decades, missing divers or swimmers whose gear surfaced well outside where the reported current could have carried it, each file closed on nearly identical wording about a lake that simply doesn't give things back. None of those families had ever spoken to each other before Nathan started calling. 3 of them have since asked him to keep looking. The 4th asked him gently to stop, and told him exactly why over the phone in a voice that made Nathan stop pushing. Nathan went back to that crevice 9 days later, off the county's books, on a permit that had already been suspended, with Grant beside him for the first time in 2 years, and a second camera Grant had rigged himself so there'd be a copy no review board could quietly reclassify out of existence. Picture agreeing to go back into the exact water that took someone from you, this time on purpose, with the person you've spent 2 years half blaming holding the other end of your safety line. They found the cache exactly as Nathan had left it. This time they didn't just look, they waited. And then, for nearly 30 minutes, nothing. No current, no movement, nothing but silt drifting through both their lights. The same shape from Nathan's first dive finally entered the frame, unmistakable even in the dark. The same low pulse along one edge his mind had spent weeks trying to explain away as current. It didn't come toward the 2 divers at all. It circled the cache once, adjusted something near the back with what looked, for one impossible second, like deliberate care, and settled in beside its own collection without so much as glancing toward the 2 men holding still against the opposite rock. Nathan braced for fear down there, and it never came. What arrived in its place, watching it turn something over in its grip like the shape alone still mattered, felt less like witnessing a predator and more like walking in on a private ritual he had no right to interrupt. That's the part no review board memo will ever be built to hold. Nathan recovered the strap on that dive, and only the strap, leaving everything else in the cache exactly where it had rested for however many years it had been gathering there. An independent lab confirmed it as a match to gear reported in Caleb's original equipment log, damage consistent with a sudden, forceful pull rather than years of slow decay. It wasn't the closure he'd spent 3 years bracing himself to need. It was better and worse in ways he still hasn't finished sorting out. He amended his brother's case file himself through a private petition, changing the listed cause from presumed drowning to undetermined, pending further investigation. The county has not responded to that petition, not even the form letter it usually sends acknowledging receipt. Priya Anand's marina proposal, meanwhile, cleared its first review board vote 2 weeks after Nathan's permit was suspended, with the habitat classification memo cited as supporting evidence for restricting future dive access to the cove. Nobody on the board mentioned Caleb's name during that vote. Nobody had to. Grant framed a photo of Caleb in his own dive shop up on the North Shore. The first time in 3 years he's displayed anything connecting himself to that name in public. He's told Nathan he plans to keep diving Tahoe's north side for the rest of his life, but he's never going back to that particular crevice again, and Nathan's never once asked him to. They still call each other most weeks now, sometimes about the case, sometimes about nothing at all. Nathan says that part surprised him more than anything his light ever found underwater. Nathan has the exact coordinates memorized, the same way his brother's old dive log stayed memorized in him without him ever trying. He hasn't published them, and he isn't going to. 100 boats descending on that crevice wouldn't just risk whatever still tends it. It would turn his brother's grave into a tourist stop before he'd even finished deciding how to grieve him properly. Some things a lake keeps aren't lost. They're being looked after by something that beat every search team to them by years. If your family ever had to make peace with a truth nobody official was willing to put in writing, tell us about it in the comments below. Because Nathan waited 3 years for someone to believe the 40 feet nobody could explain and Grant waited just as long to say the part he'd been afraid would get him blamed twice. And if you want more accounts brought back up from the deep, subscribe, because the next family asking this lake to finally give something back is already out there, and this channel isn't done finding them.